There are a lot of superhero games out there. Some are really, really good, and others are the biggest piles of trash. We scoured the internet and forums to see what you all thought about some of these games. Today on gameranx, here are the 10 worst superhero video games of all time. Starting off at number 10, we have Thor God of Thunder. This is early in the MCU, back when they were still trying to release these tie-in games. Now, this game wasn't totally horrible from what we've seen, but it also is not fantastic, just kind of meh. It was your basic hack and slash style gameplay, but that's all there really was to it. There wasn't much else at all. It wasn't a great looking game either, and while Tom Hiddleston and Chris Hemsworth did lend their likeness and voices to their video game counterparts, really didn't help make it at all any better. Matt Fraction did co-write it though, so there was some really good comic book talent attached to it. He wrote that really good Hawkeye run before Jeff Lemire took over, followed by Kelly Thompson, which, if you haven't read, it's a must read for sure. But yeah, Thor, not good. Not horrible, just kinda lame. And at number 9, let's talk about Marvel Nemesis Rise of the Imperfects. This is the first game from an EA and Marvel partnership that lasted only a few years. I guess they botched this just as badly as they botched the Star Wars deals. Just kidding. Kind of. Fallen Order looks dope. Anyway, this was such a big deal for Marvel and EA that there was actually a comic book tie-in series. And these new imperfect characters are actually EA created and owned, and also kind of lame. That's also who you spend most of the game playing as, unfortunately. It was just a really lazy fighting game, and the AI characters were really annoying and would spam projectile moves at you, which would drain your health until they were able to activate this game's fatality-like move, instantly winning. I guess it kind of felt like fighting your little brother in Tekken or Mortal Kombat who would just spam one attack the entire time, but yeah, if you can avoid playing this one, that's probably a good idea. And at number 8, this next one is kind of a deep cut game, but like a bad deep cut, obviously, and that's the Silver Surfer game for NES. The reason this game is so bad is because of how hard it was. Now, yeah, I know most NES games are pretty difficult, that's like a thing with NES games, but with Silver Surfer, it was just kind of bullshit. It was essentially a side-scrolling shooter, except everything can one-shot you off of your board, forcing you to die and having to start over. It was hard and annoying to the point of not being fun. Not like Dark Souls or Sekiro hard, where it's pretty fair and it takes some practice and, eventually you get through it, but this game is just kind of a dick. It really doesn't want you to win, and its difficulty was kind of there as filler to make the game longer when really the game just wasn't good. Moving on to number 7, we have Iron Man 2. In the early days of the MCU, there were actually a few movie tie-in games, which is something they mostly gave up on in the future, although I think I would have loved to see a Winter Soldier game, because that first Avenger tie-in game actually wasn't half bad. Anyway, just like Iron Man 2, the movie, the game isn't really that good either. The game was super short, coming in at like 5 hours long, and you spent those 5 hours fighting the same enemy type with the same repetitive combat. You did get to play as Iron Man or War Machine, but there really wasn't too much difference between the two, so it kind of didn't even matter. At that point, it's just a color palette. Iron Man doesn't have the best track record with video games, unfortunately, which sucks because you'd think an Iron Man game would actually be really cool because he's just a walking tank. You remember that Heavy Metal game where he teamed up with XO Manowar? Cool idea, but terrible execution. At number 6, we have Batman Dark Tomorrow. This one is actually like a super bummer. When originally shown off, it actually looked pretty good. It looked cinematic, comic book accurate, and it was supposed to take place in an open world Gotham, but then something bad happened in that development cycle, and we ended up getting not exactly what we were hoping to get. First off, it ended up being a linear game, and it also has the worst camera angles. Like, they're really bad. The way they snap back and forth is extremely jarring, and that, mixed with the really bad controls, had you walking just into walls and everything around you. The combat was also pretty boring. It's also super boring to look at as well. Pretty much imagine the total opposite of the Arkham combat, and that's what you had here. Thankfully, Rocksteady showed us what a real Batman game should play like, so Rocksteady, thank you. Give us another one soon. Next up at number 5, we have Spawn Eternal, and I'm just gonna get this out of the way. I remember this game being pretty awesome, actually, but I was also a kid who thought anything Spawn was cool. Actually, I still think anything Spawn is cool, but according to everyone else, this game really isn't good. And I totally understand. First off, it's not at all nice to look at. Environments look really bad. Spawn looks chunky and stupid, and also has the loudest, most bassy footsteps I think I've ever heard in a video game. And did I say that Spawn looked really bad yet? because he looked really bad, dude. One of the weirdest things about this game is actually its combat. So when you're exploring the game world, the camera is behind a capeless Spawn's back, and then when you run into an enemy and it was time to fight, Spawn would throw on his cape and the camera angle changed to a side shot like in a fighting game. Then it turned into a really bad fighting game, and the controls changed. It was just a weird, chunky mess of a game, and I honestly, thinking back on it, I don't know how I liked this thing as a kid. Like, it's bad, man. Like, just look at this. This is bad. At number 4, we have Catwoman, a bad game for a bad movie. Do you all remember this movie? I still don't understand how something could be so bad and still come out. Like, yeah, this is good. The audience is definitely gonna love this. The same thing could be said about the game as well. The controls were super hard to understand. The camera would shift and change so often that it might actually lead you to projectile vomit all over your TV. Like, it was that bad. Along with a boring and lifeless game world and super simple and boring combat, there is literally nothing good about this game. Like, there is no reason for you to play it. I can't think of a nice thing to say about it. And that sucks because Catwoman is a really cool character and they just ruined her with this game and this movie, and I'm still not over it. Moving on to number 3, we have XMen Destiny, and I want to say that leading up to the release of this game, I was actually pretty excited. It seemed pretty cool, like I was into it. There was legit reason to be excited. First off, it was written by Mike Carey, who wrote the X-Men Legacy comics at the time. You played as a young player-created New Mutant who had to choose between the X-Men and the Brotherhood, and player choice, carving out your own story and choosing your own destiny was a big selling point. But all the choices you made barely had an impact on anything, so you really didn't get to create your own destiny. It was just a huge letdown. This definitely isn't the worst game on this list, and overall people don't seem to think it's, this horrible garbage pile of a game, but it's really more of a disappointment than anything else, because this could have been something great, and it just wasn't. Next up at number 2, we have Aquaman Battle for Atlantis. This is one that a lot of people really do not like. They're very outspoken about how bad this game is. First off, I just want to say, and I'm sorry because I'm sure I'll catch some flack here, but why an Aquaman game? I mean, yeah, they used a cool pirate-looking Aquaman, but did we really think an Aquaman game would be that fun? Maybe a Jason Momoa one, but I digress. The graphics aren't easy on the eyes. The ocean you're traversing is boring. The combat is just nonsense button mashing. And you were able to call in help from fish, which is cool, I guess, if you like fish. Yeah, this game will definitely go down in history, but not for good reasons. Sorry, Aquaman. A lot of your hero friends are just way cooler than you are. Finally, at number 1, we have Superman: The New Adventures, better known as Superman 64. This probably has to be one of the most hated superhero video games of all time, and also just one of the most hated video games in general. Leading up to release, people were actually pretty excited. Then what we got was this mess of a game that came off as a joke almost. Like the developers were trying to make the worst game that they possibly could. Superman's flight controls were horrible, unresponsive, and asked too much with multiple button prompts needed at times. And you're Superman, so you fly a lot. That's like a big deal. So that was a big mess up. The game that only looked like crap, but around like crap too, with clipping happening often, a bad unstable frame rate, and there was a heavy use of distance fog, which I guess was used to hide how bad the game looked, which made flying around Metropolis horrible. You couldn't even see like 3 feet in front of you. You didn't even know that you were in this giant city. You could see like 2 buildings at once if you were lucky. It's almost like the developers really just didn't try with this one, and that's not something I throw around. Like, it's a mess. Honestly though, it's a super fun game to watch because of how bad it is. Not fun to play though. Don't play it, but if you want, look up videos on YouTube and watch it. It's just fun to watch and laugh at. Oh, and before we go, we have some honorable mentions as well, or I guess dishonorable mentions. First, the Fantastic Four game for the original PlayStation. It was a 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up with 3D graphics, but it was that awful, terrible time for 3D polygonal graphics where they just weren't quite there yet, and it made the Fantastic Four game atrocious to look at. And it had this really, really weird and awkward soundtrack to go along with it too, and did I mention that it just wasn't that fun? Yeah. We also have The Incredible Hulk: The Pantheon Saga, another PS1 era superhero game that was just lame. It was also released for Sega Saturn, and it was considered one of the worst on that platform. It wasn't very fun, really easy, and generally tedious and visually rough around the edges. Just like the Fantastic Four game, the Hulk deserved better. And those are the 10 worst superhero video games of all time, but we want to hear from you. So meet us down in the comments and let us know what you think. What are some of the worst superhero video games that you've played? We want to know. As I'm sure you already know, hitting that like button really helps us out. And if you're new here, subscribing is a good idea because we put out videos like this every single day. As always, thank you for stopping by and hanging out with us. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.